If you take a man and a woman, right, and you put them in completely separate rooms and show them both a deeply distressing image like, say, a picture of a severe car accident or a crying child, their brains look completely identical for those first few milliseconds.
Right, yeah, like perfectly identical.
Exactly. If you're looking at the functional MRI scans, you see the exact same intense spike in the amygdala, the exact same rush of fear, the exact same hit of sadness. But then within seconds, the male brain does something so quiet and so neurologically efficient that society completely misinterprets it as just a lack of emotion altogether.
Yeah, we basically mistake a highly automated regulatory system for, an empty room.
Yeah.
And that fundamental misunderstanding, I mean, it shapes almost everything about how men are treated.
All right.
From the time they're literally boys on the playground, all the way to how they function in relationships as adults.
What do people actually mean when they call a man simple? I mean, I was reading through some of the articles in our stack, particularly that piece from The Modest Man, and the societal definition seems to revolve around being highly pragmatic.
Right. Very straightforward.
Yeah, the trope is that men say exactly what they mean. They just want straight answers. They love to fix tangible things, and they avoid drama at all costs.
Yeah, the framing is always about this straightforward existence. You present a problem, the man provides a solution, and then he just, wants a sandwich in a quiet room.
Right. But, okay, let's unpack this with an analogy. Is calling a man simple actually a compliment, or is it just a really convenient way to describe, like, a smartphone?
A smartphone.
Hear me out. Think about a smartphone in your hand. It looks incredibly sleek and simple on the screen. You tap a brightly colored button, and it instantly plays a video or sends a message. But underneath that glass, the hardware is insanely complex.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, it just looks simple because the user interface is specifically designed to hide the massive processing power it takes to execute those commands.
That's actually a great way to look at it. And the thing is, society has a massive vested interest in maintaining that sleek, simple user interface.
Why is that?
Well, when we look at the sociological essays in our stack, they delve into this concept of ontological security.
Ontological security, that sounds incredibly academic.
It does, yeah. But it essentially just means a sense of predictability, order, and safety in how we exist in the world. Think about how comforting it is for society to know exactly what a specific group of people is meant to do.
Okay, right.
When a man is placed into a clean, simple box, the stoic provider, the protector, the guy who doesn't have messy emotional breakdowns, it just makes the social order feel stable.
It's predictable, but there's a very dark side to forcing people into that simple box, which brings us to the Reddit threads.
Yes, those were eye-opening.
Truly. We analyzed this huge discussion where men were asked anonymously how they felt about being labeled simple. And one user left a comment that really anchors this whole deep dive. He wrote that calling men simple is really a system that allows us to neglect their emotional needs from day one while still getting production out of them.
Wow. That quote, it perfectly encapsulates the sociological theory of hegemonic masculinity, which revised sociology talks about in our stack.
Expand on that a bit. What does that look like in practice?
Well, the media constantly reinforces these rigid, uncomplicated tropes. We see the strong, silent type, like a James Bond, who absorbs physical and emotional trauma without even flinching.
Right, he just adjusts his cufflinks and walks away.
Exactly. Or, on the flip side, we see the buffoonish, bumbling dad trope, the Homer Simpson, who is just too simple to even understand his own family's emotional dynamics.
So it's either stoic hero or lovable idiot.
Pretty much. Society promotes this simple narrative because it acts as a cultural hall pass. It excuses people from doing the heavy, exhausting work of engaging with male emotional complexity.
Because if a man is just a simple creature, society doesn't have to hold space for his grief or his anxiety or his trauma. The society just gets the bridge built, the war fought, or the paycheck earned.
Exactly. It is fundamentally a societal convenience.
But if society is treating men as simple just to keep the machinery moving, we have to look under the hood at the actual hardware. Does the biology actually support the stereotype? Are male brains just wired to be less emotionally complex?
And this is where we turn to the functional MRI study from the Oxner lab. They set out to see if men and women experience and regulate emotions differently at a neurological level.
Which goes back to the brain scans we mentioned at the start.
Right. Behaviorally and neurologically, the initial emotional reactivity is completely identical. When participants were shown distressing images, the men's amygdalas, which is the primal emotion center of the brain, spiked just as intensely as the women's.
So in that first millisecond, the initial hit of distress, fear, or sadness is exactly the same. The difference doesn't lie in what they feel.
The difference lies entirely in how they regulate that feeling. So, in the second phase of the study, the researchers asked the participants to intentionally downregulate their negative emotions.
Okay, like calm themselves down.
Yeah, they were told to use cognitive reappraisal to calm themselves down while looking at the disturbing images. And the fMRI scans revealed something completely counterintuitive.
What happened?
In men who were regulating those negative emotions, they showed a massive decrease in amygdala activity. They calmed down. But the scans showed less activity in the prefrontal cortex compared to the women.
Less activity. But wait, isn't the prefrontal cortex the part that handles control?
Exactly. The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain responsible for effortful, conscious cognitive control. It's the brain's braking system.
So if men are achieving a profound decrease in emotional distress, but they're using less of their conscious braking system to do it, that means what?
It means they are highly efficient at emotion regulation. They're relying on automatic, less deliberate neural processes to quiet the amygdala.
Oh, wow. So they don't have to consciously sweat and strain to suppress the negative emotion. It's almost an automated background process.
Yep. The researchers actually back this up by having the participants take an implicit association test, or IAT, for emotion regulation.
That's the rapid fire word categorization game, right?
Yes, played under intense time pressure. It's designed to reveal subconscious associations. And men consistently scored higher, demonstrating that they have much stronger, deeply ingrained automatic associations with regulating and controlling their emotions.
That's fascinating. But wait, what were the women's brains doing during this?
Well, the fMRI scans showed that women tended to use a completely different brain region during this downregulation process, the ventral striatum.
The ventral striatum. Okay, explain the mechanism there. Why does that region light up?
The ventral striatum is heavily involved in reward processing and positive reinforcement. The neuroscientists suggest that women in the study were actively generating positive emotions to offset the negative ones.
Oh, I see.
Think of it like trying to fight a fire by frantically pumping water onto it. It works, but it takes a lot of conscious cognitive effort and energy. Men, neurologically speaking, aren't pumping water. They are just cleanly and efficiently turning off the gas line to the fire.
Turning off the gas line, that is such a vivid way to put it. And we also have behavioral research that layers hormones on top of this neurological efficiency. Let's talk about the Frontiers study on the Iowa gambling task, because it looks at how men process risk and reward under pressure.
Yeah, the Iowa gambling task is a classic psychological experiment. Participants are given 4 virtual decks of cards and some starting money, and they had to choose cards one by one.
Right, and some decks are rigged, basically.
Exactly. 2 of the decks are high risk. They offer massive payouts, but also devastating penalties that will eventually bankrupt you. The other 2 decks are safe. They offer small payouts, but very small penalties, leading to steady long-term growth.
And usually the stereotype is that men are known to take more risks, gravitating toward those volatile decks.
They do, typically. But this study introduced a major variable, which was acute stress.
They stressed the participants out before making them gamble. How?
They induced stress through various tests, which floods the body with cortisol, and they specifically looked at the dual hormone hypothesis, which examines the interaction between cortisol, the stress hormone, and testosterone.
And the results challenge the whole men are reckless under pressure stereotype, right? What actually happens when the stress hits?
Well, initially, cortisol spikes. But as the cortisol levels begin to decline and regulate, testosterone steps in. And instead of driving reckless, impulsive behavior, the testosterone actually improves cognitive decision-making.
Wait, really? Testosterone makes them more careful.
Under these specific conditions, yes. The dual regulation of these hormones essentially pulls the male brain away from reckless impulsivity and locks it onto calculated, safe rewards. Under stress, the men shifted their strategy to the safe decks, making highly regulated long-term decisions.
Okay, wait, let me push back here a little bit.
Sure, go for it.
If the male brain is this hyper-efficient, calm, calculating machine that automatically regulates distress and makes smart, long-term decisions under pressure, why do we see so many guys punching holes in drywall?
Ah, yes.
I mean, where is that quiet efficiency when a guy cuts them off in traffic and they explode in road rage? If they're so good at regulating, why all the outbursts?
That is the exact friction point where biology collides with socialization. The biology is highly efficient at regulating the internal state, But early childhood conditioning fundamentally warps the external expression.
Oh, okay. The societal software over the biological hardware.
Exactly. From a very, very young age, boys are subjected to a rigorous conditioning process that tells them certain emotions are just forbidden.
This was a massive theme in those Reddit discussions. So many men talked about being told boys don't cry or man up when they were like 4 or 5 years old.
Yeah, literally toddlers.
Long before they had the cognitive ability to even understand what those phrases meant, they were being penalized for crying.
And the consequence of that conditioning on a developing brain is profound. Boys learn on the playground that expressing sadness, fear, or vulnerability is physically and socially dangerous.
It's a survival mechanism.
It really is. As the Literal magazine essay notes, expressing those forbidden emotions risks losing their membership card in the male fraternity. It invites mockery, bullying, or outright rejection. So when a man feels deep sadness or insecurity, he can't just let it out in its raw form.
Because if he does, society punishes him. So those complex emotions don't just vanish, they get transmuted.
Transmuted is the perfect word. And this answers your question about the drywall and the road rage. In many cultures, anger is the only socially acceptable negative emotion for a man to display.
So it acts like a funnel.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly like a funnel. A man might feel deeply insecure about his job, terrified of failing his family, or devastated by a perceived disrespect. But the only output valve society allows him to open without losing his status as a man is anger.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? Society forces a dozen different complex emotional states through the single valve of anger, and then society looks at the outburst and says, see, men are so simple, they just get mad.
Right. It completely erases the complexity of what's actually happening underneath. And this conditioning goes all the way down to the foundational mechanics of how men and women communicate.
You're talking about the linguistic research from UT Permian Basin.
Yes. That research highlights two distinct styles. Women are heavily socialized to use rapport talk. This is communication specifically designed to build bonds, show empathy, share emotional states, and sustain relationships.
Basically, talking just for the sake of feeling connected to the other person.
Exactly. Men, however, are conditioned from childhood to use rapport talk. Their communication is socialized to be direct, decisive, and entirely focused on conveying information or solving a specific problem. It is highly transactional.
And this extends way beyond just the words they use, right? The research shows that nonverbal cues make up a massive percentage of how a message is received, and men are conditioned to be much more reserved nonverbally.
Oh, absolutely. For example, men will often avoid prolonged eye contact during a heavy emotional conversation.
Why is that?
Because sustained eye contact can feel like a direct invitation to emotional vulnerability. It feels invasive to a brain that has been conditioned to stay guarded.
Man, there was an incredibly striking analogy in the Reddit sources that captures this guardedness perfectly. A user was trying to explain why men actively avoid emotional deep dives with their partners, and he compared the male inner emotional life to a nuclear waste repository.
Yeah, I remember reading that. It is a bleak but honestly incredibly illuminating comparison.
He explained that a man will actively, intentionally pretend to have the emotional depth of a puddle, just to sidestep having his inner life disturbed. Because he knows that if he shows there's a massive, lavish treasure vault of complex emotions inside him, people will constantly try to drill into it. They will want to explore it and unpack it. So he acts simple as a defense mechanism.
He puts up the warning signs.
Exactly. He acts stoic and pretends there's nothing down there so people will just leave the repository alone.
You really have to understand the cold, hard logic behind that defense mechanism. If every time a man has opened up in the past, he's been met with a partner's judgment or told he's weak by his peers, or worse, had that vulnerability weaponized against him in a later argument, I mean, why would he ever open the vault again?
He wouldn't.
As another man in that same thread wrote, if 7 out of 10 times I walked into a specific room, I got punched in the face, no one would be surprised if I just stopped going in there.
That is heavy. But it's so vital to understand. So let's translate all of this into something you, the listener, can actually use.
Yes, let's get practical.
Now that we know men are incredibly complex, that they have this highly efficient neurological hardware, but they've been conditioned to hide it behind a simple defense mechanism, how do you bridge the communication gap? If you want to connect with a partner, a father, a friend, or a son, how do you actually get past the blast doors of that repository?
Well, the secret is learning to speak their conditioned language, rather than demanding they learn to speak yours. And we have excellent, actionable data on this from the UTS study on men's preferences for language in mental health promotion.
This study is so important because it moves beyond the theory and into practice. What did the researchers actually find?
They found that men vastly prefer coded or indirect language when discussing emotional or mental health topics. Direct clinical terms, words like depression, anxiety, therapy, or even just the phrase processing your emotions, often carry a really heavy stigma.
Why is the stigma so heavy for those specific words?
Because to a man conditioned to be self-reliant and to use report talk to solve problems, those clinical terms imply that he is broken and incapable of fixing himself. It directly conflicts with his masculine norms.
So if you walk up to a guy and say, hey, let's sit down and talk about your emotional vulnerability, you are essentially guaranteeing that the vault doors will lock shut.
You are immediately triggering his defense mechanisms. Instead, the study found that men respond exceptionally well to dynamic, action-oriented language. You have to frame emotional processing in a way that feels like a tangible problem to be solved.
Metaphors are incredibly powerful here.
Oh, absolutely. Specifically, metaphors related to physical health, sports, or machinery.
Give us some examples of how you would put that into practice.
Sure, so instead of asking to process heavy emotions, framing a conversation as checking under the hood or recharging the battery makes the interaction feel safe.
Checking under the hood. I love that because it inherently honors the fact that there is a complex engine down there. It acknowledges the complexity, but it uses terminology that feels familiar, mechanical, and totally non-threatening.
Exactly. Or consider framing mental health as mental fitness. By changing that one single word, you align with their conditioned norms.
Because fitness is an action.
Yes. It reframes emotional vulnerability not as a weakness, a deficit, or a sickness, but as a proactive strength-building exercise. It turns an emotional struggle into a tangible project that can be actively worked on, which appeals directly to their conditioned desire for competency and action.
It completely changes the power dynamic of the conversation. You aren't asking them to surrender their membership card in the male fraternity. You are actually giving them a tool to engage with their complex inner world while keeping their protective armor intact.
Spot on. It is all about meeting them where their conditioning has left them, rather than judging them for not being where you want them to be.
Let's bring all these threads together. We set out to figure out why the simple man trope exists and what is really going on beneath the surface. And the takeaway is pretty definitive. The simple man is a myth.
A total myth.
It is a narrative born out of societal convenience because dealing with complex male emotions is messy and it challenges the predictable social order.
And it's a myth sustained by a biological reality. Men possess a highly efficient, automated neurological system for regulating emotion, which makes their processing look quiet and uncomplicated from the outside.
And then early playground conditioning takes that quiet biological efficiency and weaponizes it. It forces boys to hide their complex needs behind stoicism, anger, and transactional report talk just to survive socially.
Yeah.
But if you can learn to speak their language, if you can talk about mental fitness rather than emotional vulnerability, you can bypass those defense mechanisms and unlock that hidden depth.
If we look at the bigger picture, all of this leaves us with an incredibly important consideration for the future. We spent a lot of time today talking about how to decode the men who have already been conditioned by society, the men who have already built those nuclear waste repository walls.
Right. The damage is done, and we are finding workarounds.
But think about the young boys growing up right now. Think about the toddlers on the playground today. If we stop labeling them as simple from day one, and instead give them the vocabulary and the safety to express their deeply complex inner worlds without penalty, how might that completely redefine what it means to be a man for the next generation?
That is a phenomenal question to leave you with today. Thank you so much for joining us on this